Thank you. Thank you for that extremely passionate introduction and prep up for us. And I welcome all of you to this panel discussion where we are going to talk about bringing the cloud experience to data and infrastructure management. Now, before we move ahead, let me add a very small bit of context to the discussion that we have at hand, which is how things have really shaped up over the past few years, particularly over the pandemic years. We have seen how the rate of digitalization has remarkably spiked. In fact, digital, which was earlier viewed as a choice, is no more a choice. It's an imperative, something that has to be followed with all its nuts and bolts. Now, in all this, the cloud technology, cloud computing has come to acquire a central, a central theme. This is something which is going to bind all the new emerging technologies together and really reap the benefits for all the enterprises taking the digital route. So today we are also going to talk about, what are the various challenges and how data and infrastructure architecture does require a certain modernization if enterprises have to keep up with the pace of digitalization that is happening across the world, across the sectors, across the industries. And to do that, we have a lovely, lovely lineup of very insightful, brilliant speakers amidst us. And I would like to start with Manoj. So Manoj, your opening remarks on basically how the technology landscape has really shaped up over the past few years.
Thank you, Mukbil, and good morning, everyone. I think evolution of technology. If I have to talk to about the evolution of technology, there are two aspects that we need to understand. How we have arrived at the cloud technology of today is a kind of a very long journey. We used to have virtualization, then first starting with the singular computing, then we have virtualization, hyperconverged, then we have arrived at the cloud. And if you draw a different way of the evolution of technology, we used to have a cycle of distributed and concentrated computing. That means we used to have mainframes and central computing systems. Then we started with distributing computing system. Then as we move to cloud, it's a kind of central computing system. Now we are talking about edge computing, which again computing goes to the point where the data gets generated. So it's a cycle which continues. And the technology actually reinvents itself, and that is a cycle that continues. Okay, talking about the technology, pure technology that has evolved. Technology brings people closer virtually and make them away physically. So that's how the technology is evolving in the recent times. As we adopt more and more new technology, so what we are essentially doing is looking at technology to ease life for ourselves and also bring together some of the efficiency parameters into our life. And that brings certain challenges for enterprises. Like if you talk about the infrastructure technology in totality, then if you for enterprise, the alignment of IT and business is something that is always seen as something that needs to be sorted out. Then there are SLAs and other things that prop in. Then cybersecurity is a big challenge for any infrastructure or technology setup. So combining with that, the end user experience and the vast amount of data that we look at, so that is also a challenge that we always kind of look at to sort out. So these are some of the random thoughts. So on technology and the challenges, how they have evolved and touch our lives.
Yes, I totally agree with you on two counts. One is that it has been a long journey of evolution and how technology has really helped shape our lives and made it easier. Now, sticking on to you for the time being, Manoj, uh, coming from the BFSI sector, from your perspective, what do you think are the primary factors which drive the need for data and infrastructure management? Because we see a world where data is being touted as the new oil, and there are umpteen efforts to leverage it to the maximum possible extent. So, keeping all those various factors in mind, what do you think are the primary drivers today?
Okay, so excellent question. So, first of all, finance industry is a conservative industry. So, when the technology and other the industry take two steps, we take guarded one step and see if everything is all right. Because the you all trust your data and trust your monetary assets with us. So, we have to make sure that we are the custodian of your data. We should be much more careful about adopting any technology. Second part is when we are, in a BFSI sector, there is a strong regulation that goes with it. So you have to satisfy the regulators. Two things. One is we should do the things right. We should also make sure that it is viewed in the right manner. That means we should be able to demonstrate that we are doing things right. So these are the two important aspects. And how technology is enabling it. So that there are multiple ways in technology enabling it. Provide insight into data. So what was not available, a few years back through analytics and big data, those things are available. So AI, ML, technology like AI, ML are making sure that things like anomalies are detected quickly and resolved. Then on top of that, availability of cloud makes it easier to run analytics and also handle large amount of data. So these are some of the things that the BFSI actually looks at in general. And frankly speaking, cloud adoption in BFSI is low and very guarded because we are heavily regulated and we want to make sure that anything that is being done in the financial industry which impacts the assets which are crucial to the general public public in general, that need to have that kind of added due diligence.
Right. So, Manoj, you briefly touched upon security. You also spoke about the regulatory landscape, as well as the emergence of new technologies, for example, AI, ML, and all of that. Now, really, Shravan, bringing you into the discussion, I would really want you to add to this, to the points that he just spoke about in terms of the need to modernize, and infrastructure, particularly keeping in mind things like customer experience, agility, and all of that.
Yeah, first of all, good morning, everyone. So as Manoj just said the right context about what is the cloud and data, what is the journey about. So we need to know more about what are all the main problems we face with the legacy level systems and matching it with the new gen applications. So the legacy which is always prone to and make more complicated one setup, and as well as it's into and 0-day attacks. So managing that it's one of the key factor, and migrating that into a cloud level, it's always a challengeful aspects. So those are the key areas which we need to time evolve around that, and how we can smoothly migrate those legacy applications into a new gen applications. So these are the key aspects which we need to took into the picture. Still, as long as we grow and the technology grows, but still our legacy systems are the core banking application, everything is there, how we can migrate that seamlessly, how the lift and shift model will easily applicable into those kind of applications. Those are the backbones of the any organizations. So that are the key aspects which we need to look into this one.
Right. So you spoke about this, legacy organizations and how legacy infrastructure is there, which needs to be migrated to the cloud and all of that. Now, So this was from the perspective of the BFSI sector, particularly coming from a highly regulated sector. What do you think are the major challenges that generally enterprises face when they are embarking on this journey towards data and infrastructure modernization?
Yeah. So basically, we need to form the operating model which suits able to do. There is a cloud. We are mostly with the two type of multi-cloud and hybrid cloud. So everybody start the journey with an hybrid cloud kind of an approach. So we should have a proper operating model should be set up. So that should have a common cloud framework should be set up, and it should be applicable wherever whoever the cloud service provider. So we should have able to cover all our bring the visibility part. So in cloud in data, the most aspects is the visibility part how we are bringing and how it is going to be more on a free error code for a programmer's coding to be done, and as well as how the authentications and how the security mechanism is going to be inbuilt into that one. So overall, the visibility and authentication and the security part, and as well as how seamlessly the data is going to access. So we should have a common framework model should be set up. So with the help of a lot of tools are emerging with that. So we can start using that CSPM cloud posture managements. So all the complaints, all the CWPP, this kind of tools will able to help us to try to bring at least the visibility factor. Without the visibility, we cannot able to identify all the complete network into the structures itself. And most of the blind spots is the key aspects where it's tend to the security lacking into this. Even though we have a coverage of completely as a cloud and as well as an on-prem network in place, when we have a multi-cloud in place, my instances will be stagnated and sliced into a different way. So my on time my instances will be running in different clouds. So how the visibility factor will bring into the picture. So we need to adapt a lot of compliance technologies into that one, and as well as we need to improve more of the security ground in that. So that's the reason I told we should have a common operating model should be set up that can be addressed across the cloud environments.
Yes. So you have spoken about the need for a common operating model. Now, sticking on to you for the time being, Sravan, how has your experience been, your cloud experience been as far as your own company is concerned?
So for us also the cloud journey is started it way back in 3 to 4 years before. So we started adapting mostly the cloud on a public cloud Azure environments. So many of the aspects what we want to do is, so we have found the word of the center of excellence. So what is the way forward approach? It should be more on the cloud on excellence. So that's the way the thought process should be. So that we are stepping towards in that direction only. So the cloud of excellence will be the futuristic one. So where we can bring all your workloads into the single point of visibility, and as I told, how we can seamlessly access all the applications.
Right. Rino, your views on this?
Good morning, everyone. My experience has been mostly in on manufacturing side, so I'll speak a little bit more on that side. What I see is existing infrastructure. While we can call that legacy, there is a huge variety that we have. There are things which are been there in plants for quite a few years, and some of these plants are 75, 80 years old, and some are less than 5 years old. There are things which we have ourselves set up over the past years, decades, in terms of greenfield assets. There are things which we acquired over time, and which came up with its own aspects. There are also things which are more linked to either the process or the manufacturing unit itself, and some things which are linked to other parts of the value chain. Originally, maybe even 5 years ago, the question and the justification mostly would have been, if I have to invest in something new, why should we be considering the cloud? And that was a question that we had to debate, understand, look at cost benefits, security, multiple other things in terms of, what are the positive benefits. All I can say is that, especially post the COVID years, the change has been dramatic. Now the question is almost completely reversed. The question is only in terms of, what sort of strategy do we have for this particular application or this particular investment. And the question is rarely, why are we not considering it, doing it on-prem? And this relates to newer investments and newer applications. And the factors are many. One is confidence, and I think that confidence was a little bit pushed a little artificially through the years where we had all to sit back at home and run plans with minimal staff, and that confidence came better and better because the systems didn't fail at that time, and they could scale up to the requirements. The other part is that there is a lot more adoption that everybody sees. There is a lot more applications and software which is now coming in on the cloud. And while they are offering on-prem also, it is not necessarily the easiest solution is usually available on cloud. Those questions that I used to face 5 or 7 years ago on what happens to who's having the data, how are you worried about security, will we be having sufficient amount of bandwidth if you're sitting in office and accessing the cloud, all of those kind of questions which were fundamental and basic, and I would say from a mindset of ownership which used to be there have now changed. Even other complex issues that we used to have in terms of multiplicity of and I would say little quaint infrastructure. There are models available on the cloud where they are able to accommodate it. And I think over a period of time, perhaps it is also the availability of other group companies within my company, which has a fair amount of experience in managing clouds themselves. So I think part of the issue was also related to that in terms of additional confidence. But all I can say is that now the question is really not of, for new investments at least, doing it on-prem will require its own justification. Migration is still an issue. There are a lot of applications which we still have, and the justification for moving them before they become obsolete, so to speak, or there is a need for a large expansion, that is still a question mark. But otherwise, I think this question, in our minds at least, it is put to rest to some extent. There are still concerns on multiple aspects in terms of who's a good provider. Do we get locked into a system of dependency, which we don't want to? And I think multi-cloud and multiple other solutions are in some sense a partial answer to that. Also, we are seeing a lot more development in future expected to happen on cloud and platforms which will be more amenable to cloud. And it is obviously, there will still be a lot of development that we will have to do ourselves, but a large amount of development in the public sector, a large amount of the development that we see across industries, leveraging the cloud will be far, far easier the way we see it.
Right. So, Rino, you said that, the fundamental questions that surrounded cloud adoption or, basically new technology adoption have all been clear largely over the past few years because of the extant circumstances. And it has indeed become more acceptable as we move along the technology curve. Now, I really want to understand the feasibility. For example, you come from the manufacturing sector, which was always, a little off the radar as far as new technology adoption is concerned. How do you see the technology landscape evolving there, particularly with the growing emphasis of data and infrastructure?
Okay, maybe I can illustrate with a little bit of example. For example, there is a certain kind of equipments that we have in multiple plants on which we were doing IoT and essentially gathering data through sensors. And some of these equipments are of different make. They are in different locations. You can gather the data. Naturally, the question was also in terms of, where do we store this data? What models do we use to analyze it? Do we use some existing platforms? And in many of those cases, the natural solution seemed to be cloud. And I think except for some people who were little still worried about the reliability of access to the cloud, as well as how fast the computation would be and how fast we will be able to get response. Because in some sense it's real time, because we need to get the recommendations for operating those machines fairly fast. I wouldn't say extremely fast, but still fairly fast. And all I can say is that in our approach, normally there is a POC, then there is a pilot before we get into scale. All those phases went through fairly well with the infrastructure that we had. And I think that that is one experience which sort of convinced us that this is the way to go. Even when we are developing and exploring new applications, the advantages are enormous. And adding on an additional site or a new machine is a far, far simpler exercise now compared to what we had to go through when we were doing things on-prem. Oh, there are complications there also in terms of what sort of cloud infrastructure to choose, how much of the platform should we be owning ourselves versus using somebody else's, and things like that. But those questions are slightly easier now. Security is also still a big question mark, especially if we are going to tier 2 or tier 3 sort of places for either cloud services or software which runs on their hosted cloud services. And I think that's a growing concern. Whether we do our own, consider them as part of our existing network, and how much security we should, how much probing of their security practices should we be doing from our side versus what comfort we can get from either certifications or the process or the credentials that they're offering. So I think some parts are there still, I would say, but 80–90%, the advantages are evident now.
Right. Rino, you come from the manufacturing industry, and you also spoke about the machines which are used, which are very, really intensive, heavy machinery that is used in such sectors. Now, my question to you is, with this growing influence of and talk about data, and of course, there are endless possibilities of how you can get machines to talk to each other and, really get data that was earlier, people used to think that it's impossible to have such data. But now that is a possibility, how are you harnessing that? And is the cloud playing a role in doing that?
Yeah, so this is a little, I would say, at least in my current sector, I would say it's not like my colleagues, SK, I think, talked about, the banking side, or if you look at the general BFSI experience, the usage of certain applications is far more prevalent. The concerns and the issues, etc., are also, I would say, more well known. If you look at process industries or manufacturing industries, some of these applications are there. They've been tried out in pockets, but the degree of adoption and the degree of maturity has been, I would say, almost a generation behind BFSI or sectors like retail or e-commerce and things like that. So I think there is one part is this. That said, the value of data has been established. So one of the things that people are now focused on is, even if we are not able to analyze this data, let's try to capture what are critical parameters, what are those data, what is the frequency under which we want to be. So in that sense, building a data repository of what we think is important at least, even if we don't have an immediate model or an application that we see, that's sort of coming in. If we see an application or an immediate usage, even if it is to analyze patterns and just recommend or do some sort of post review, such applications have started coming in. So in that sense, I think the need for capturing data, keeping track of things, even in new plans, even at concept stage, we are sort of building it in now. When we will have sufficient amount of data to start analyzing it, recognizing patterns which are stable, use that to optimize either our process efficiencies or things like that, it may be still a while later. And partly it is, I think, linked to the fact that we still don't know how much accuracy is possible in some of these applications. And the number of companies who have been doing in that same process area or that same manufacturing space, they are not too many across the world. So I think that's one part. There are some standard spaces where I think predictive maintenance and things like that, where I think applications have been established, and I think it's far more easier to convince people, make the effort, collect the data, look at it once in a while to see if it is clean, and then look at the model and see if it makes sense to you. So I think those parts are a little easier.
I agree with you in the sense that at least the first step has been taken, where you are able to capture and collect. And then maybe, it will progress to more evolved state where you would be able to analyze and run that data for better insights. Now, I would really want to go to Padmaja. We have had all this talk about, how cloud has become central to the digitalization efforts of enterprises. So, to your mind and from your own experience, coming from the public sector, uh, how do you think enterprises should architect this cloud journey in order to be able to really reap the maximum out of the data and infrastructure that they have?
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. So I am from a public domain and I have been working on to e-governance domain most of the times. And e-governance itself evolved after cloud a lot, because earlier whenever we used to design any e-governance applications, we used to have designs for data center at the most. And then it is having a replication at DR, so that there will be a 24/7 availability as such. Nowadays, it is a mandate by government itself that all the applications that we are building at a national level must be coming onto cloud, so that we can bring in the agility into the applications. At the same time, all of us know that whenever we are building any kind of applications at a national level, what we require is a scalability. We all have seen COVID kind of application during COVID scenario. The kind of data it generated within a very short period of time was enormous. And that kind of application obviously requires cloud kind of a setup, and we cannot run it onto server, because if that is suppose not working or under maintenance, everybody was facing problems. So the cloud has shown its importance and necessity in the e-governance, especially during COVID scenario. I'll just name a few applications of ours which we had developed earlier for a normal scenario, and now we need to migrate it onto cloud. So earlier, we all know that very recently we had launched one application called as Meri Pehchan. So which will provide all the citizens a single sign-on to all the government applications. So earlier, we were having this running onto a server, and now if we look at that, all the government applications are going to get integrated with this, which means that the data may not be as enormous like BFSI sector, but the data which we are storing is confidential. And we require that this kind of a data must be well protected. But at the same time, citizens can be accessing it from anywhere, anytime, and hence the scalability is important. At the same time, the distributed nature of it is important. So earlier days, we were using certain databases which were more of a useful for centralized development kind of a thing. Now what we need to look at kind of a MongoDB or NoSQL databases, so that we will be able to replicate the data at different decentralized locations. So why this kind of a replication? Because let's say I'm trying to use this e-Praman, which is Meri Pehchan, from say Chennai, okay? And there is a heavy traffic on Chennai. Every time coming from Chennai to, suppose I'm having my cloud setup in Delhi, okay? There is always some kind of a network delay that gets introduced. But if I'm having the whole India distributed, let's say into 4 sectors, east, west, north, south, like that, and if we are having that kind of a distributed cloud, it becomes much better access for citizens. It gives much better performance also for the citizens. So one part is that usually even in case of government application, our observation is peak load is only on few days. It's not consistent, because we do not go to government applications every now and then. It is, sometimes we do require them. Now, at such times, obviously, we require a cloud setup. Otherwise, there is an infrastructure which is kept is going west. And that is what we have seen, that earlier days, because the cloud load may increase tremendously, we buy more infrastructure, keep it in DC, and its utilization is hardly 30 or 40%. So it is waste of infrastructure. But whereas now we have moved to cloud and we can see much better infrastructure utilization. At the same time, of course, government cost saving, because it's not utilized, so we are saving on cloud money as well. And secondly, the data is being getting now distributed, so we are getting much better performance for these applications. I would just like to point out one more aspect, which is especially for the government applications, what we realize is a lot of data which is staying as a confidential one, which you know that if I might be putting my login password or something, even biometrics like in UIDAI. Over there, on cloud, what we require is to protect that data. And hence, there are again some certified cloud providers, but security is a major aspect for us and data privacy to be maintained onto the cloud setup. So those are the concerns which are faced by government applications while using cloud. Another important aspect, all of us are aware that when we are having Make in India products, and also we are trying to become Atmanirbhar. At the same time, Indian government is trying to focus that its data should remain within India rather than somewhere outside, again from the security and privacy perspective. So those are some concerns, but of course utilization architecture, we have to now choose on the right kind of a database. Secondly, rather than going only for the centralized development, we need to think about the architecture which is more decentralized so that we can focus more people or citizens of India. And thirdly, bring in agility, because usually what happens is whenever we are working on government applications, we develop the core first. And depending upon the kind of response and we are receiving from the citizens, government tries to modify the functionality or have add-ons to it. This requires much more agility. And this kind of agility is easier with the help of clouds rather than having the server kind of a setup.
Right, that was an excellent perspective from the public sector. Thank you, Padmaja, for that. And she spoke about the need for a decentralized architecture, which is a great point. Now, sticking on to you, you gave a particular perspective from the public sector. Now, looking at enterprises across industries, do you think there are gaps which are preventing enterprises from really leveraging their data as it currently is? We have already spoken about the gaps that there are in infrastructure. Yes. But vis-a-vis data, what are your views on that?
Again, what I'll try to bring out is from a decentralized architecture aspect also. Currently, what we require is whenever we are having a centralized kind of architecture, we are having a data located at one place. Okay. Now, what we require to understand is if my architecture is decentralized, my data will be distributed. So, somewhere kind of a micro segmentation of data is another aspect which we need to look at whenever we are having a cloud setup for the development. As a user or for example, now I'll just briefly go to, let's say, IoT. Okay, we are trying to capture now the data from, let's say, different IoT devices. It is completely scattered. But obviously the decision making that happens onto this scattered data is through the data analytics, or as Sir had mentioned, through AI kind of techniques where you need to analyze the data which is existing over there. So from that, this kind of a cloud setup should provide these kind of services where data consolidation or data gathering can become much easier. Another aspect, already most of the cloud providers do provide identity management kind of solutions. Okay, if we could have even these kind of solutions provided for all the applications on the cloud as such, is it possible to have a single sign-on from all the cloud users? So currently, many times we do face even interoperability issue between the clouds. Can we overcome that kind of an interoperability? Because then the data sharing between the applications developed on different cloud setups can become easier, because these days none of the application work in silos. I think earlier one of the keynote speaker also mentioned about it, that what we require is application of one or data from one application is shared with another application. For example, in the passport, I might require income tax, or maybe land records might require income tax. Sorry, I'm taking again the examples from public sector because I'm having that data in mind. But we need to share that kind of a data, then and then only the appropriate decision can be taken by the system. And for that, if these kind of cloud setups become interoperable, I think that will be the best kind of a scenario. Maybe at this point in time, yes, this is the scenario what I'm looking for.
Right. Excellent points coming from you, where you have advocated for the need for interoperability between applications. This is also data. So now really bringing Kunal into the discussions. Kunal, how do you see enterprises, what are the key ways in which they are going about modernizing their data and infrastructure today?
So, good afternoon, folks. I'm so glad that we have a panel here which is like representative of what enterprise and the country looks like. We have someone from public sector, manufacturing, financial services, and each one had an example of how they are utilizing cloud and how they're moving to the cloud and what are they doing in terms of moving there. So I think cloud has become part of core IT infrastructure strategy for everyone. And we are seeing this trend accelerated post the pandemic is because I think a lot of customers in enterprise realize the benefit of cloud and being able to deliver those services without really in person physically being there. So we are seeing an acceleration in terms of adoption. What are moving, the workloads that are moving to the cloud very fast are anything that is customer facing, anything that is spiky, right? Citizen services is a great example, right? You never know how many customers citizens are, customers for government, how many are going to turn up, what's the capacity that I got to plan for. So those are some very simple use cases where customers have already moved. What we're seeing now is even core systems of record like SAP, large data warehouses moving. And from a data perspective, the other trend that we're seeing is up till now, most enterprises used to have data analytics post-transaction. Right? Once you've done a transaction, you do end of day reconciliation, you see where you did the transaction, value of the transaction, etc. But we are seeing a trend away from there where enterprises are starting to measure metrics much before in the value chain, right? Right at where the customer's coming in. Looking at behavioral data within an application, collecting real-time data from the application as the user is using the application so that they can better the application and their services. So that leads to a lot more data generation, and it's very difficult to kind of do this in a traditional legacy infrastructure, and that's where the cloud helps from a data perspective as well.
Right, and how can Google, in the scheme of things, really come in handy as far as enterprises make these efforts at rapid digitalization and trying to harness, infrastructure and data that they already have?
Sure. So I have a very simple model for data. I use just 4 words around that: collect, analyze, gain insights, and then action. And Google has services around all of these 4, right? We have services around being able to collect data from the machines that, Rino spoke about, collecting data from large applications which are customer facing, then being able to kind of analyze them and query them at scale, right? At petabyte scale in seconds, and being able to bring insights. And then most importantly, you can collect as much data as you want. If you don't action on it, that data has got no value. So we can then have services which you can take action on and then close the loop on that. So Google GCP's got services across all of these 3, and those can be very rapidly used. And they're democratized because most of them are pay-per-use. So you don't need to spend billions of dollars on buying a data warehouse. You can, anyone with a credit card can actually go and start those services.
Right, excellent points coming from you. Rino, last, we are already almost on the top of the hour. The clock is ticking away. The buzzer is also there. Your closing remarks on how do you see this field of, data management really shaping up in the future, with particular reference to the criticality of cloud in the scheme of things?
So I see essentially cloud being a ideal solution for exploring as well as managing and starting to develop applications on data. And I think many of the colleagues here have already given their views on along the same lines, including how ease of access as well as distribution of data is much better done on the cloud. And I see a lot more applications, whether it is from cloud service providers or this whole concept of digital public goods, for example. There is a lot of data out there which is coming increasingly available. There will be a lot of applications and other aspects also, and hopefully at some point in time we will have a much better interoperability, as was mentioned by Dr. Padmaja. And that I think will start spurring a lot more value on maintaining data on the cloud and starting to utilize, maybe in some sense, some sort of virtualized services which are developed for by one or two parties, but applicable to databases which are hosted on by multiple clients. And I can see a lot of that possibility in the future. All I will say is that this is a trend which is still to give fruits in the future. And I think a lot more work will still be done to realize all of that.
Wonderful. Friends, we've had a lovely discussion where we had very varied perspectives from as diverse industries as, the BFSI, manufacturing, and the public sector, and of course, we have a company also. And now, you want to add something?
So before the final touch base, so as we talk more on the data and as we talk more on the cloud, so most of the, as Saurav told in his session, so many of them are 50% is technical people and 50% non-technical. I like to give few inputs on a data management on a lighter note. So data and the diaper, both are same. If you have to handle it more carefully, both tend to leak. So what we have to do is we continue to see the indicator of that one and keep changing it. It's a continuous process overall.
But did you say data and diaper? Wow. I don't think I have ever encountered an analogy as interesting as this. And, but we will definitely go into the merits of it at a later date as to how the two are interrelated. But for now, I think the time is up, and in the interest of time, we'll have to wrap this up. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for this wonderfully insightful discussion where we spoke about, we covered a lot of aspects concerning, data modernization, infrastructure modernization, and how cloud can be a glue in all these digitalization efforts. Thank you all for being such lovely speakers, and we had a very patient audience. I'm hoping that there will be questions later, but for now we'll need to wrap this up. Thank you all.